Good to see you all. I'm going to turn my webcam off now. All right, so welcome to the first Agility Partner Learning Lab. This is something we're really excited to do. We're going to be doing this monthly going forward. So again, I'm Chase Linsenbigler. It's great to have you all here. And what I do here at WiSys is I manage all of our partner enablement. So this is my day-to-day, what we're doing today. Generally I'm going through and I'm training partners on the product, teaching partners about functionality, helping them with, customer related issues, all of that type of stuff. So if your team isn't doing anything like that with me today, just be aware, that I'm a resource here full time for that type of thing. And growing our partner program is a big goal for us for 2023. So we're going to be working to do all kinds of things, get more marketing documents, more documentation, those type of things available for our partners. But in addition to that, learning labs are really our first big step on this partner training initiative. So again, the second Tuesday of every month, same time, 2:30 to 3:30 Eastern, we're going to be doing these sessions, and we're going to cover all kinds of things throughout the year. That's going to range from things that are a little more design tool oriented, like this session, things that are just a little bit about the base product, form functionality, process flows, and then even some things that are more sales and support focused. We'll have Aaron, who's here moderating today's chat. He's going to do a few over the course of the year that are a little bit more talking about sales and opportunities. We'll have Jim Haydinger from our team in here to do some support learning lab sessions too, talking about things like, implementation requirements, installation requirements, and support frequently asked questions, frequent problems, those type of things. So going back to the fact that I'm a dedicated resource for you guys, our partners, there's a couple of different ways that you can take advantage of that if you're interested in setting some more things up after this session today. Typically, what we're trying to do now is implement introduction training for all of our partners. Now, if you've been a partner with us for a while, you may have had that in the past and are rusty and, would like to seek out, another overview training to just kind of refresh the team. Maybe you joined in the past and didn't really get that full introduction training, or maybe you're someone who's just signed on and you're looking to get something like that set up. That's usually somewhere around 10 sessions worth of trainings, and we go through the entire product. We give you the full rundown so you can feel comfortable, at least with base knowledge of what WiSys is, what the product does, the capabilities, all that fun stuff. After that, we do in-depth design tool training, which this is starting to get into that today, what we're going over, but it's not as deep as we would do with one-on-one or team-based design tool training. But that's really for anybody on the team who's going to be doing tailorings. They could of course benefit from that so that they can get good with the product and get good with it fast. And then lastly, we like to try and get standing team meetings with our partners. We've had a really good record of success with that so far, where team meetings so that we can regularly communicate with you guys. You guys can bring issues or questions you have regarding WiSys to me. You guys can ask me about specific customer problems, customer situations, what's the ideal process flow, that type of thing. Those standing meetings give us that ability to be in constant communication and really have an open forum style workshop meeting there so that we can take care of all things WiSys for your team. So those are some of the other things that we can get set up here in the near future. So feel free and reach out and set something up, because that's a big goal of ours this coming year, is to get you guys the resources you need to be successful with WiSys. Now, all that stuff aside, let's get into what we're learning today. So today we're going to be covering a full scale label designer customization of a standard WiSys label. So what that's going to entail is we're going to open up with just some standard overview. Of course, that's going to serve as a good refresher for any of you who have touched the product before, but maybe haven't really worked with it recently, or maybe you're not as strong with the product and you have a little bit of experience, but you don't really remember where everything is. That'll give you a good little refresher there. And then I'm sure there's some of you guys who haven't even seen the label designer product. So that's going to give you a foundation of what's really going on in the tool, how the tool works, before we jump right into customizing something. Then we're going to customize our standard WiSys label. That's going to be our out of the box goods receipt PO label. Of course, when you install WiSys, you get a series of out of the box labels that work automatically with the WiSys system. So we're going to show you how to customize one of those today to fit a customer specification. That's going to entail rearranging the label, adding a barcode, adding a standard hard-coded text field, adding a text field that pulls data from SAP Business One, adding an image, then setting that whole new label up in our document manager to print automatically from a mobile application in Agility 360, which in this case is going to be our out-of-the-box GRPO form. Also, too, before we get too deep into this, like I mentioned, Aaron's here moderating today, so this is intended to be collaborative. Feel free to send any questions you have throughout the course of this in our chat, or you can raise your hand. Aaron will let me know as we have questions and different things going on, and we want to try and tackle as much of that as possible. I'll also try and leave about 10 to 15 minutes here at the end for questions as well. So this is the label that we're talking about, the label in question, our standard out-of-the-box GRPO label. As you can see, it's pretty basic here, pulls item information at the top, a description, then we have a little bit more going down, here at the bottom of the screen. What we're going to focus on, though, is this body today. So we're going to leave this all alone down here. We're going to be making some adjustments here. We're going to make that label into this. We're going to call it our lab GRPO label. It's a little bit of a more advanced label. Of course, with our label designer tool, you can get very advanced with labels. You can have some crazy labels, some difficult labels to put together. While this looks rather simple, these are some of the more advanced things that customers may ask of you. Now, of course, label, it will get a lot more intensive than this, but this is a good place to start. We're going to add an image. So in this case, it's supposed to be a customer logo. Of course, I work for WiSys, so it's going to be a WiSys logo. Then we're also going to add batch information to the bottom of the label here. So this customer, everything they're doing on a GRPO is always going to be batched items. So they're requesting that we put, a field to identify that we're looking at batch information, the batch number, and then a batch barcode at the bottom of this label here. So now I'm going to go ahead and open up Label Designer. And here we have our standard out-of-the-box goods receipt PO. So first off, for anybody who hasn't used Label Designer, this obviously may be already set up as a shortcut icon on your screen. If not, you can get to it through your file explorer. You can go to your C drive, program files x86, WiSys, and then to your bin folder there, and that's going to have all the WiSys products, and you would just find our Label Designer product, and then of course open that up and get in here and start working on things. Now with the labels, when installation is complete, all of your labels will be stored again in that program files x86 folder, WiSys, but this time instead of bin, it's going to be in doc. And this is all of your out-of-the-box custom labels. All of your out-of-the-box and custom labels should be stored in here. It's just easy to keep them all together. But again, out-of-the-box labels, we have things like bin and carton and basically any standard out-of-the-box functionality WiSys has, there's probably a label that goes with it. So here we're using this goods receipt PO label, which looks like this. So before we get into the customizing, we're going to talk a little bit about the tool and do a general overview here of the Label Designer tool. So this is a pretty standard drag and drop user interface here on the Label Designer, and that's pretty similar to other design tools that we have here at WiSys. So, if you've had a chance to look at Form Studio or Design Studio, they all have a similar base type of functionality, right? It's pretty much drag and drop and clicking through a few settings here on the main screen, but it's all pulling data from a query that runs behind the label. So first, let's talk about that query. If you go up here to the data section, here we have our SQL query. This is where all the data is going to come to the label. So the customizing of the label, the setting it up, the user interface, that's all pretty simple. This, you're going to need to have, a little bit of SQL proficiency. If you copy a WiSys label, generally, the entire SQL might be done for you. It might have everything you need, or you might just have to add a field or two in the select statement. Now, if it comes down to just adding a field or two, that can be done down here in the query editor just by checking some boxes. You don't even need to necessarily have any SQL background to do that. Now, if it gets more advanced, of course, you may need a little SQL background. And for what we're doing today, it would probably require a little bit of that. But so here we have our query, and this all pulls in our where statement from a parameter. Here it's doc entry. that parameter is going to be the data that is passed in from the handheld application that tells us what that label is printing, right? So in this case, we're printing based off a doc entry because we're going to print item and batch and quantity information based on what came in on that purchase order there. So here we have our doc entry that's set up as a parameter in our parameter list here. It's just a string doc entry, pretty simple. And that's how our form is able to communicate to the label. Now, if we jump back over to our home tab, we're just going to go through a couple of important things to note on the ribbon. Of course, there's a lot of things up here that are pretty explanatory, like your cut, copy, paste, undo, save, all that stuff. But let's talk about setup. So when you create a new label, you're prompted with setup immediately. That's going to allow you to put in, the dimensions and things like that for your label. But sometimes it's not as obvious when you're changing an out-of-the-box WiSys label. So if you go to your setup here, that's where you're going to be able to go in there and adjust your gap lengths. You're going to be able to change the dimensions of the label, those types of things. This gives you that opportunity to do the setup. So that's just an important setting that, is often missed. And we do field a lot of questions on, okay, how do I change the dimensions if I'm, taking a standard out of the box label? It's done right here in setup. Next, if we go over here in printing, we do have the ability to preview and test labels here in the system, which is going to be very important. And we're going to do that when we do our following label. We're not going to look at that right this second, but basically that's going to allow you to identify what the value is going to be passed into that parameter, so you can actually see your label pull data from the system and make sure it ends up looking how you want it to look when it has data, make sure the data is coming across correctly, that type of thing. Then we have our objects. Of course, the most important part of the label. So like I mentioned before, all these objects are pretty much drag and drop. You can see here, drag them around the label. They also snap to a grid, so you have the ability to use your arrow keys to move things over. That's what I just did there. It all snaps to the grid, and you have a roller here that you can use to line those things up. So placing those is as simple, again, just like something like Microsoft PowerPoint, is clicking on the field, drawing. So in this case, I'm drawing the text box, and now you have it on the field, and you can move it freely as needed. With a text box here down the side, you have the properties that go in line with the text box. And there's really, two main things that you need to worry about here. It's the appearance section here, and then your data section down here. Those are the things that you're going to use the most. Of course, there may be other features in behavior and design that you might need in certain cases, but typically, we're going to be talking about data and appearance, and that's all we're going to cover today. Now, within data, you can have a text field that pulls data from the system. That's indicated by this blue symbol right here, and you can see when I hover over it, it's going to tell me what field in my query it's pulling data from. Or you can have a text field that does not pull data, which is this field. As you can see here, there's no blue symbol. It's just a plain field. It's hard-coded text. How you set up a field to pull data here is by simply just going to this data field, you hit your drop down, and that's going to be everything that you programmed into your SQL query. It's going to pull in a list there for you, and you can go ahead in there and select whatever data is necessary for the field. Now, if you don't want to do that, you would simply clear that data field out or never put data in it to begin with. And then you're going to go up here to your text field and you're going to name it whatever you want. So let's say we're just going to call that data. Click here. Now it's hard coded, pretty simple. The other aspect of this that's important is things like font size, bold, the ability to italicize, that type of stuff. That's all going to be handled here with this font drop down. That's going to be probably your best friend in the tool when it comes to data fields or standard text fields that don't pull data. Just that being able to adjust your font and things like that, of course, that's important for the look and feel of the label. So that's all done right here in the font section. All right, so that's the basics of text field here. Now let's get into barcode real quick too. These are, of course, going to be the main fields. I mean, you can see this out of the box label only has data-driven text fields up here. It does have some regular hard-coded text fields below and barcodes on it. It doesn't have an image, it doesn't have RFID, and that's most common. Most labels, it's going to be barcodes and it's going to be text fields. Very common. So here with a barcode, you'll see it's a similar layout, but there's a lot more information in here. I'm going to tell you it's daunting at first to look in there and see how many settings there are. And yeah, there might be, times where you have to play with something where, maybe you need to change some things about your data matrix or something like that. That might come into play when you're working with different symbologies. But as far as this is concerned, this isn't going to be something that's, you need to know exactly everything that's going on in there. We can schedule trainings to get deeper into that in the near future. The main things, just like the text field that you're going to worry about is pulling data, which again, you go down to your data field. Here it is. You assign it in here. You do have the ability to hard code in here too. Like if this was supposed to be my warehouse and they were just going to scan this for warehouse, if I wanted it to hard code, I could put 05, and every time you scan that barcode, it's just going to read 05, but I know that's my warehouse number. I don't care. I'm just going to hard code it. You do have the ability to do that. But in a lot of cases, we're going to be pulling it from our SQL query, of course. So let's say in this case, I'm going to make this a warehouse code data field. I would plug that in. Now it assigns it a human readable as well. So something else important to note, in a lot of cases, like the custom label we're going to be designing, you don't want that human readable. So if you don't want the human readable, you're going to scroll up here to text again, just like your text field, back that out, and it's going to take the human readable away. So pretty simple, pretty similar to the text field as far as those things are concerned. But the one last very important part of this is the symbology. So of course, your customers are typically going to tell you, okay, this is the type of barcode I need. Of course, we want to pay attention to that and we want to have those details, but we have a massive list in here of symbologies that we can do, pretty much anything you want. We can do QR codes. That's a common question we get. WiSys supports that. I mean, typically, if you think of a barcode you're going to need to do, we have that ability in here in WiSys. But standard out of the box, it usually defaults to code 128. You can change it to whatever you need. See, there's a code 39, code 93. You can change it as needed, of course, but defaults typically code 128. You go from there, and if something's specified that they need a specific barcode, especially for something like a shipping label, then you go ahead and do it. But going back to that though, QR codes, yes, they are supported now. We get that question all the time. All right, so that's how a barcode functions in here. Pretty simple, pretty similar to the text field. Very cut and dry. There's just a few fields you really need to know. Then again, we have rectangles, lines, and ellipses, so circles, ovals, that type of thing, to come in here and just break up the data. That's how you get into that design aspect. We're not really going to do a lot of that today, but mostly, that's utilized for borders and breaking up information and putting some separation on your label. And lastly, we have the classic Microsoft style arrange tools up here too. That's something that comes in handy, especially with things like borders. If your border here, like your rectangle, is the last thing added, sometimes it can be a little bit of a headache because you're trying to click around on your label and you keep selecting it because it was the last item added. It's at the front, and it can be a pain because it's in front of all your other fields. So of course, in that case, you send it back just like you've probably done 100 times on Microsoft PowerPoint, and you just clean that up, and there you go. Now you're able to access your text fields and different things a lot easier. But now that's a general rundown of what we're looking at here in Label Designer. Just a quick touch on it. Now we're going to get into our custom label. So first, before I do that, I'm going to reopen this label. I'm not going to save the changes. I'm just going to reopen it because I drug some things around a little bit here. I want to have the right label. So here's our standard out of the box goes your CPO label, not edited by me, ready to go. So that's ready. Now let's jump back to our PowerPoint here and look at the customer specifications. So in this case here, again, we're doing some pretty simple work, but we're going to need to move our item code fields. We're going to need to change that description field, add some batch info, and add that logo. So jumping back to Label Designer, the first key step here is going to be creating a copy. We don't ever want to overwrite these labels in the system. Of course, that's gonna cause some issues because you're not gonna have your standard out of the box WiSys label there anymore. You want to try and keep those. Those are going to be updated with the product, things like that. We're going to save this as a copy. And in this case, we're going to call it lab grpo. Now you're going to see here, I already have that in my system from testing this, of course, and doing this multiple times. So we're just going to go ahead and overwrite that right now. So now we have this new label, lab grpo, looks exactly the same still as our standard grpo label. And this is what we're going to go ahead and make those adjustments to. So we're going to start by editing this item section here. So first I'm going to take this item field, make it a lot smaller. It was about 2 squares in on our grid, still 2 down from the top. I'm going to shrink this a little bit to make more room for that batch data. Pull this in. And this is going to end up being the same length as item code and about 1 square down. So you see here, all I'm doing is I'm pulling it very similar to how you would pull a text box or something like that in, again, like a Microsoft tool. You'll see our tool set very similar to some of the things you can do in Microsoft. And I use that as an example just because that's something that I'm sure you guys all have experience with. So it's, an easier way to make this relate. So now there we go. It's lined up. You see it's even with the item code. That's how it is on our specification here. Now it's set up. Looks like we actually have 2 spaces in between. So we'll go ahead and drop our barcode down 1 more. All right. And now with that, I'm going to take this field, our description field here. I'm going to bring it up. You can see I'm having issues with that border. So now I send it to the back and it should be less of a headache now. Bring that up with, we'll do 1 spacing instead of 2. It's also very important to make sure that you have the right amount of spacing between a barcode and a text field. Of course, if a text field's too close, the writing from the text field might interact with the barcode and cause some issues whenever you're trying to scan. So there we go. We have our description field pulled in there. Now we're going to change that to be our batch. So now we're at the critical point here, where our data does not have what we need because we need to bring in a batch. So the shell of the label is ready to go. We have to go get that data. So I'm going to go ahead, open up my query here. And again, this is supposed to be a relatively quick, we only have an hour session here on how to do, a fairly advanced label. So it's not a SQL query writing learning lab here. So I already wrote my query. I'm going to drop it in here. So I just go back into our tool. I'm going to paste in my query. And then I'm going to format it to get it back to our standard query designer style here. Makes it a little bit easier to view and understand what's going on. And this might not have been the perfect query for this, but it was something I put together quickly just to make sure we got through this in with minimal issues. I'm just pulling in my batch number here from an aliased batch table down here. That's again joining on the item. Then it's going to join on that doc entry for our purchase order there. And then it's going to look at the correct base type as well, because we don't want other documents factoring into this. So now after I put that in and I formatted it and it all looks good, we want to make sure it works correctly. So we're just going to go ahead and validate our SQL query there. Validation completed successfully. Now you do have the ability to hard code something into your parameter there and execute the SQL and actually see what it brings back in here. For the sake of time, we're not really going to worry about that right now, but you have other tools in here to test your query as well. So now we're going to save that and close out of our query designer here. Now the data is here. We're ready to go. The data is ready to be pulled to the label, and everything should be able to run as needed. So if we jump back over here to our home tab, we're going to need to add our text and barcode, but first we'll go ahead and change this from description now down to we're actually going to hard code this one. So we're going to back everything out of our data field. Click here. Oh, I did not want to click there yet. We're going to back everything out. Now we're going to type batch in here in text. And I also want this batch to be uniform with everything else that's going to be on the screen, like item code there. So if we go check, this should be Arial and 14. Yep. Arial size 14. So then we're going to do the same with our batch field here, Arial, then we're going to change it to 14. Then I'm going to need to extend my field. So your field also needs to be stretched, to the right length so that it, allows the full size of the word there, of course. So there we go. Now our standard batch field is on there, not pulling any data, just introducing, okay, what's going to be below here is going to be batch information, of course. So now that's set up, and we are going to be able to pull our next field down, which is going to be our data field, pulling the actual batch information. Now, I'm going to show you this, but we're going to do a little shortcut here. So if I pull down the field, you see here, now obviously for the sake of time, I'm slowing myself down by talking to you guys about this and doing it, but there's a shortcut to do this quicker. If I pull down my text field here, though, we see that it's obviously a different font. It's standard ZPL font 0 is what our labels typically pull. And that is actually the font that's going to interact the best with Label Designer from a performance standpoint usually. But for the sake of this, we're using Arial because that's what I started with, and I want everything to look uniform. But to that, so this field right here, it's pulling no data, and it's not the correct font. It's just going to take me a couple more steps to get it where I need it to be. So I'm just going to delete it. And what I'm actually going to do is copy this item code field, again, because it's already the correct font, it's the correct size, and it has a data field set up. So it's quick and easy. I'm just going to have to fix that field there. Now that's fixed. Everything looks good up above. Now I can go into this new item field. We see our font and our size is already correct. I know that seems like a pretty obvious time-saving step there, but sometimes that's something people don't think about when they're designing the labels, and it saves you a ton of time. I mean, typically, if I'm making a label that has 4 barcodes and 4 new text fields, I'm copy and pasting every one, and it's saving me 20 minutes. So it's a good tool to have in your tool belt. Now I'm going to go ahead and extend the size here on this item code field. All right, and then instead of dragging this time, I'm just going to use my arrows to bring it up one space below batch. And I also wanted to make my batch bold for the sake of view and making it clear to my warehouse worker. They're walking around and looking at the label. So now I bolded my batch, same font, same size. This one's going to pull data. I need to change that data field here to be that batch number that is now in our SQL query from the adjustments we made earlier. And now those fields are set up and ready to go. And now we just need to add our batch barcode. So again, I could copy. In this case, I'll just draw it on here for you. So we're going to make our batch barcode here. And if I look back at my customer specification, it's a little bit tighter here, right in the middle of the label. It's not going to stretch the whole way, and it's going to come right up to the text. So I can drag it into the center of my screen. I can use my roller here at the top of the screen as well to, basically measure exactly where I'm going to put it to be center. Which again, the look of the label is just as important as the data. We want it to be really clear to the warehouse worker. We want them to be able to access any information they need relatively quickly. Pull that up a little bit. All right, so now you see here too, the bottom of my barcode's touching that line. That's what we don't want because that could interfere with the barcode scanning. So I'm gonna put it up. There's no line on the bottom of this text box. It shouldn't interfere, but just in case, I'm gonna push this up one more too. And now that's not going to touch my barcode at all. I feel comfortable scanning that. I don't think it should cause any issues for the user in the warehouse. So now we have the bones here of this. Everything looks exactly like our spec sheet here. Now there might be slight differences, of course, in sizing and things like that. We're never going to get it exactly perfect based on the specs, but we can get it as close as possible, especially utilizing the grid here. Now we're ready to add our logo. And again, in this case, it's going to be a WiSys logo. So I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to just draw it on here. So again, very similar to PowerPoint or something like that. You draw the box where the image is going to sit. All right, I like the spacing on here. I might pull it over one more here. Spacing looks good. It sits in there nicely. We see where the image is going to be. Now we need to set up the image. So we're going to go over here and we have two options. We have the ability here still to assign a data field. So that's something that is also underutilized in our labels currently, but we can do it. If a customer requests it for you, it can be done. If, let's say in this case, they have an image on their item master in SAP Business One, it's an image of the item. We could put that in our query so we can look at the tables, figure out where that image pulls from, set that up in our query, and then put it in here as a data field. And this image could be different every time. It could pull, an actual image of that item if that was requested by the customer. But in this case, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to hard code an image in there because they just want their logo on the label. So that's pretty easily done. You just go to this source base 64 here, click the ellipses, and that's going to bring you to your file explorer. It brings me directly to my document drive here where, I have all my WiSys labels, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go in this WiSys logos folder that I have and grab one of our logos here. When I insert that, you're going to see it's going to convert it to monochrome immediately. Now, that's a good tool to have in a lot of cases because, you're probably on a label, you're probably pretty often printing black and white. You want the logo to look good on there, that type of thing. So that might be something you run into often. But for this case, this customer, okay, they're able to print in color on the label. They want it to be in color. So we're going to go ahead and change this from convert to monochrome true. We're going to change that to false. And now we have our WiSys logo on there. So again, if we refer back to our image here, our label now, and it took maybe 25 minutes here, is exactly the same as what the customer specification is. And again, labels can get much more intensive than this. They can be a lot bigger. They can have a lot more elements on them. But this is, from an advanced standpoint, this is some of the most advanced things you'll have to pull to label. And it's not all that bad. It can get a lot more intensive than this, but this is a really good start, and it took us about 20 minutes on here. Of course, I do this all the time, but the more you do this, the more practice you get, it gets pretty quick. So now we have this label set up. Let's check it out. Let's see what it actually looks like when it's pulling data here. So I'm going to go up to my preview, save my changes. I'm going to enter in my parameter, my doc entry. So of course I have one queued up already. We're going to do 845, save that. And here's our label. So we're looking back at this order 845. It had 2 batched items on it. I can go back in there. I can see the item barcode, my logo, my batch number, and batch barcode on there. So now we have a clean looking label ready to go. And now we're going to get ready and print this from a handheld application in the system. So I'm going to jump over to our desktop product, Agility Explorer. Again, for those of you that are newer to the product and don't have this, the shortcut would be an AE if you have it. If you don't have a shortcut made, again, it's going to be in that program files, x86, WiSys, and then in that bin folder there, and it's going to be just called Agility. We're going to go up to File once we're in there. And then in our options, we're going to go to Documents. This is the WiSys Document Manager. Again, on installation, all of your labels should be in here already. So all the out-of-the-box labels that you have will be prepared and ready to be printed from this document manager upon installation. So with that being said, if we want this to print for a GRPO, I can go to Purchasing, I can go to PO Receiving, and I can see my standard out-of-the-box GRPO labels already set up here in Document Manager. And that's how it would likely look for all of you guys when you go and check out your product. So now if I go to my goods receipt PO label here, click on properties, I'm going to turn this one off because I don't want the original to print anymore. Then I'm going to go back to that PO receiving bin here, right click and hit new. Go to my file path. And again, in this WiSys doc folder, that's where all of our labels reside. It's filtering on Crystal reports right now. What I want to see is WiSys Agility labels, WLB file. Click that and scroll down till we find our lab GRPO here. Now that's going to be set up and ready to print when we hit save here, But first, just to, introduce a couple other things about Document Manager for those of you that aren't as experienced with it. From within here, we have a few options for how we set up our label as well. We can change it from portrait to landscape. Of course, that's, something fairly simple. We can set it up to print multiple copies. If our customer wants one label per each side of the box, we can set it to 4 there and label every single side of the thing if we want to. We have the ability to do a prompt. So maybe every time I want to, identify how many labels I want to print. This prompt would pop up on the screen. It would ask, okay, how many labels do you want for this box? You could enter in 3 and then it would print 3 labels, that type of thing. We have the ability to change all those things. I'm going to keep it pretty standard here because this isn't a course on Document Manager. We're focusing more on the label itself. So we're going to keep it at portrait in 1 copy. Go ahead and save there. And now you're going to see our Lab GRPO label set up here in Document Manager, ready to print from that PO receiving section, which interacts with our standard out of the box goods receipt PO form on the handheld. So now I'm going to hit OK there. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up my handheld. So here I have an emulator. Also with this is showcasing our Agility 360 product. If any of you aren't set up with that, that's something our team can work with you on. Agility 360 is emulated through Android Studio on my device here. That's how we typically recommend doing it. Of course, I'm sure there's other emulators out there that you can use, but this is how we're able to showcase our new product. And of course, out of the box, we also provide you with Agility Mobile, which is more of a legacy handheld solution that we do offer still as well. But yeah, this is our brand new Agility 360 emulated through Android Studio here. And I'm going to go to our goods receipt PO application. And now I have some barcodes ready to be scanned here. I'm just going to run through a test purchase order. So once this loads, I'm going to scan my order. Then I'm going to scan my item and my new batch number, enter in my quantity of 1. And the way this out of the box application works is when I enter this, we're saving to a preload table here. So you do have the ability in our settings to change this to be a single transaction where, every time you do an item, you're creating a new GRPO for that item. Now, in this case, I'm not set up to be single transaction. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm saving every item I go through to a preload table, and then I'm going to use a post functionality to post them all at once to the same GRPO. So now I'm going to go ahead and post. And upon posting, we're going to automatically print our new label here. We're going to print it to screen, and we'll see our brand new Lab GRPO label print from the form. So, in relatively short order here, about 30 to 40 minutes or what have you, we were able to design this label, take the customer specifications, add a new barcode, a new data field, a logo, rearrange it, all that good stuff. And then we were able to set it up within our document manager here to print directly from one of the out of the box handheld forms. So, with this, we are customizing a label, which is a little bit of consulting time for the customer, and a little bit of undertaking, but this required no customization of the form. This required, no customization of the WiSys process. It's all out of the box functionality in WiSys that's able to still access and print, this form that we were able to create here. So again, like I said, these forms can get more advanced than this, but these are the main, types of functionality you're going to need. I mean, even something like adding a photo to the label is not all that common. It basically comes down to being able to structure the label, knowing, how to set up a barcode, how to set up a data field, and, placing those things on there and making your label look nice. Those are the biggest things that we cross here in Label Designer. So that is the bulk of what we're going over today. So if I jump back here to the PowerPoint, just to reiterate, we went through a general overview of what's what in Label Designer, gave you a little tour. Then we customized our standard label. We took that out of the box GRPO label. We saved it as a copy called Lab GRPO, and then we made customizations to that, which we begun by rearranging the label. Then we added a barcode, a text field, and a text field pulling data from SAP. We added an image, which in this case was our WiSys logo. And then we set that new label up in our document manager. That was through Agility, our Agility Explorer desktop product. We set that label up in there, and then it printed from our mobile Agility 360 device that I'm emulating here on my screen, and that was done using our out-of-the-box GRPO form. So, for additional enablement going forward, feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, we're opening this up for questions. That's why I wanted to get done here with about 10 to 15 minutes left, and looks like we're right on time for that. But, enablement again is something very important to us here going forward at WiSys. We want to make sure we give you guys the resources we need. So here's my contact information, and reach out to me. But sessions typically are very similar to what we did here today. I give you a tour of WiSys and teach you about how to use the product and how to access what you need. So
Chase, not to
yeah,
interrupt you, but
yeah,
we do have a question. If you're looking for a few questions out there, we
yeah.
have a question from one of our attendees.
Yes,
What?
now's the time.
Yeah, what they're asking, and I know the answer to this question, but how do you purchase Agility Label Designer? How do you get that solution?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, if you want to field that, because that's a little bit more
Yeah.
your place, go ahead.
So yeah, Agility Label Designer is included with all levels of WiSys. So from our essentials out of the box solution, all the way up to the Enterprise Edition. Now, obviously, this is part of the desktop Agility Explorer portion, so you don't need a scan gun license to run Agility Label Designer, but you would do the Agility Label design work in the Agility desktop. So a desktop license would be required, but that is included with the package of WiSys of all modules. So all levels of the licensing that we have. So thank you for that question. See if we have any other good questions here.
We got a
if anybody
from Matt there in the questions. So
yeah,
I can unmute him, right? I'm still using the tool myself here, everybody.
Yeah.
Bear with me.
I'll unmute Matt here for you.
Yeah, go ahead. You can do it. Aaron, you're the pro with webinars, so.
Yeah. So Matt's question here is, let's see if I can pop this out and see it. How are users handling the barcoding required data from their suppliers?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that depends. So typically, the suppliers are going to send spec sheets and things of that nature. I mean, there's a variety of different ways that that's done. If you get a box that's coming in with a barcode on it, we can utilize that. I mean, you could simply set that up in SAP Business One in the barcode field on the item as well. It really depends. There's a lot of variance to that. A lot of suppliers do send, spec sheets or something of that nature too, that explains, their requirements for barcoding and what you're going to see or what you're going to need to know, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty open. I mean, we can handle almost any barcoding requirements based on the customer, especially even we haven't gone through GS1 barcoding and things like that, which is a little more tailored than standard barcoding. But usually the requirements are published by the vendor or the supplier, given to the customer, put into the ERP, and then we can retrieve that information using the label designer to build that barcode label for you.
Of course, as we showed before too, the symbology field there in the barcodes and label designer, there is, a million options. And it's the type of thing too that, of course, that's ever evolving. New barcodes come out all the time and we hear new requirements all the time. But for now, I still haven't run into a situation where a customer requested something that we couldn't provide. We have QR codes in there and things like that now. So typically it's in label designer, but if for some reason we hit a snag there, new barcode symbologies can be developed all the time by our team as well.
Great. Thank you for that question, Matt. I think that's all the questions we have for right now, Chase.
All right.